maiden has a mythic migratory sister in the European tradition, folklorically, and this is the white stork. The white stork has a very different migration pattern than the swan. So while the swan is leaving Northern Europe and Eastern Europe at the beginning of spring, the stork is arriving. The stork winters in the south in Africa and summers and nests in the heart of Europe. And when the storks return in the spring, they love like high up prominent places to nest. And because from forever in Europe, in Central Europe, it's been bad luck to in any way harm or damage a stork nest, they like to nest in people's chimneys, on people's roofs, in the tree right in the middle of the yard. This is a very common sight, especially in previous decades and centuries when stork populations were more numerous, to see great stork nests on people's roofs. And so they not only built their nests in these places, but they raised their babies right at the heart of the village. Right at the heart of the home, they raised their babies. And again, like I said about the Vincha bird women and the dancing young women in Bulgaria in the 20th century, have the storks until their populations have been diminished by, environmental catastrophe, by like that kind of reasons. The storks have been nesting on people's roofs, in people's communities, in Germany, in Austria, in France, forever. What if they never stopped roosting until recently? And so this association with the stork having babies on top of the house, has just been there for thousands and thousands of years. Of course, you're probably thinking of the kind of, I don't even know what to call it, the stork brings the babies concept that we all must have heard as children. Like, where do babies come from? The stork brings them, and the image of the stork flying with a little baby in a napkin, coming with it on its beak and bringing it to your doorstep. That's where the baby came from. So this actually comes from, again, a probably millennia old belief in the center of Europe. And this idea got popularized in the late 19th century by the Danish fairy tale writer Hans Christian Andersen. And he always kind of put not the greatest Christian lens on everything, but he did popularize what were just basically very, very old folk beliefs in the regions of Northern Europe. And at the heart of them was this idea that I think is really beautifully illustrated in the German tradition, actually, of something called stork stones in German. And these were stones that it was said that storks would go find in special caves or marshes, and they were like black or white stones. And in those stones were babies that would hatch, and the storks would bring these stones to women who were wanting to have a child, and that's where the baby came from. It was also said there was a connected belief, or we could say a parallel belief, that the souls of the dead and of the yet to be born, you could hear them in the waters, like in the stream, in the well, in the spring, in the river. If you put your ear to the earth, you would hear them. And it was said that the storks could fish them out, and the stork would bring the soul of the new life to a mother who wanted to have a child from those deep waters. Isn't that gorgeous? So given the fact that we can say for certain that swans and storks, have been migrating in unbroken rhythms since the beginning of the beginning in the lands of Europe until very recently, when human bad behavior has badly damaged their migratory patterns and numbers, given that we can say that with fair certainty. And we can also see that there are traces of this connection between big migratory birds, shape-shifting women, dancing women, healing, fertility, visionary experience, and childbirth. I think we can safely say that there is indeed a lineage that connects those Vincha and Cucuteni bird women down through the rivers of time to now. So I just want to point out a couple more points along the line of this lineage and a couple more features of the bird women that help us understand who she was. And I think obviously we're already getting kind of a picture, but I just want to give us a little bit more. So what's interesting that Marija Gimbutas did note in her research is that with the coming of different waves of Indo-European language-speaking writers from the steppe around 3000 BCE, and into 2500 BCE that created a drastic and violent change in the DNA and in the cultural patterns of Europe. So again, I'll just repeat this from lecture 1. The DNA evidence has proven Marija Gimbutas right in what she saw as the great pattern of what happened in Europe, that indeed the male Y chromosome in Europe got completely wiped out, the old European one, and replaced with the Y chromosome of the Indo-European Yamnaya people from the steppe around 3000 BC, meaning the female DNA did not. Mitochondrial DNA did not get replaced, which means the men were killed and the women were married and integrated, which means that it is in the mother lines that the memories of old Europe have been retained. And they've been retained for everyone. I just want to say this, they've been retained not only for the women, they've been retained for the whole community. Because mother line, matrilineal, matrifocal culture systems protect everyone. They do not favor women. They favor life, and they support life. Matrilineal, matrifocal cultures love their men and their sons and their brothers deeply, but they do not center male aggressive power. They center something else. And so it's important to just remember that the mother line lineage that we are holding of a memory before patriarchy in Europe is not just for women. The memory was retained in those mother lines. And of course, from generation to generation to generation, what's remembered in the mother line from one's grandmother's traditions is shared with one's brothers and sons and husbands and fathers and uncles. We can imagine and remember that it was through the women who remained that the memories were held and kept alive. I get emotional about that in Europe because what happened with these waves of Indo-European migrations was very, very violent. So what Marija noticed was that once this happened, all of the bird woman figurines stopped being produced, like they were gone, which suggests something interesting about potentially the empowered role that the bird women figurines and deities held. There was a sense of power that suddenly was no longer being articulated in the material record in Central or Eastern or Southern Europe, except in Minoan Crete. Now, Minoan Crete was the last kind of holdout of non-patriarchal, non-Indo-European conquered culture in Europe in the biggest way. The whole culture was not conquered in the same way until about 1500 years later. And so in Minoan Crete alone, we see the tradition of bird women, of women with wings, of women with bird masks and like breast perforations that pour out sacred libations. We see this continue quite strongly in Minoan Crete. And we see it continue until Mycenaean conquest in around 1400 BC, the Mycenaeans being descendants of the same people who came in waves across the rest of Europe. Particularly the height of where we see a lot of these bird and woman hybrid figurines is in the Proto-Palatial period in Minoan Crete, which is from roughly 2000 to 1700 BCE, so very early Bronze Age, kind of last of the Neolithic. We see incredible seal stones with carvings of winged women, well, in a way, actually, woman-headed birds, because the bird is so emphasized in many of these carvings, that are dancing. Of course, we also see the famous snake women with snakes twined around their arms, and as we mentioned earlier, the snake and the bird often go together in this very early iconography. There are a couple really famous, beautiful vessels that are evocative of both women and birds. So there's one that's one of my favorites with a bird beaked face and these triangular arm shapes that suggest bird wings, and then breasts that are perforated and that would pour out a libation, and also chevron zigzags painted on the body. So all of those symbols, 4,000 years later still, or 3,000 years later still maintained and understood on the island of Crete. And beyond this, there's abundant evidence for Cretan women's ecstatic, consciousness-altering dance traditions. We see on seal stones many, many, many depictions. In fact, most of the seal stones, these little golden rings from Minoan Crete, depict women dancing, and they're dancing in such a way that suggests that they are invoking vision through their dance. They are going into a trance and calling in vision, and that visionary beings descend in response. So there'll be, a circle of women dancing, and then like a winged woman, tiny, descending in the background. So there's a sense of spirit flight out, and or the calling in of a being to commune with in order to receive, oracular information. And of course, the most famous Cretan woman from the mythic tradition is Ariadne, the so-called princess of Crete, daughter of King Minos. I have other thoughts about that, but I'll save them for later. But that is who she is in the myths that have been handed down to us. And what she is best known for is her dancing. And in the earliest mention of her in the written record, which is the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, she's described as, the fair-tressed Ariadne, who is this beautiful dancer. And Daedalus, the famous craftsman of Crete, has created a dancing floor for her. There's no mention of labyrinth or minotaur like trapped in the labyrinthine maze at this point. That, in my opinion, is a much later development that is a confused misinterpretation of forgotten belief systems and practices in Minoan Crete. In the earliest mention, Ariadne, she dances the labyrinth, and this is important. And Homer doesn't really know why, but he mentions it. He's forgotten why too, but it's still in there because it's remembered that this is important. And what I will just say is that the labyrinth and the meander shape are remarkably similar. So it makes me ask, is Ariadne the memory of a bird woman, of a dancing shamanic priestess who danced herself into trance and into visionary state in order to prophesy for her people and also heal and bless land and call for the support of primordial foremothers? And even after the fall of Minoan Crete to Mycenaeans from the mainland, bird-winged goddesses actually still persist in Greece, and we need look no further than Athena herself to see this association. Athena, who always has the owl on her shoulder and who in her earliest depictions is winged. In like the earliest kind of archaic Greek vase paintings, we see her with wings. And what she also has besides the owl and those wings, well, what happens is those wings seem to turn into this cape that's edged with snakes. That's what she's later depicted always wearing. And this cape feels rather like wings, but the snake has been brought in. And that owl on her shoulder, of course, is the indication of her wisdom, of her connection to extrasensory perception, which is so beautifully embodied by the owl as both bird and one who sees in the dark. And many different scholars, most notably Martin P. Nilsson, who wrote kind of the big Minoan Mycenaean religion book in the 1950s, which has been very influential. He suggested, as have others, that Athena was originally Minoan, with her birds, with her snakes, with her fierce role as guardian of the house and the city. Athena has real political power, or at least she is deeply embedded with the state itself in later Greek tradition. And this should tell us something about these earlier bird women, that their kind of power was seen to be deeply protective and fierce and actually like politically centered. That's what this suggests to me. Otherwise, why is it that Athena becomes guardian of the city-state and not a male god? And another hint of this root system of Athena's is the fact that she's literally given a helmet, a warlike persona, and a new origin story, which is that she was born out of Zeus's skull, which is like the most outrageous thing I've ever heard. It's about as outrageous as women coming from Adam's rib, and as tactical, if that makes sense. Like, this is the most outrageous, but also obvious break of the matriline in favor of the patriline. What literally is said in the classical myths about Athena is that she has no mother. She has no mother. She has only a father, and she came out of his head. She came out of nobody's vagina, no vulvas involved, just this split in his head. And to me, there's something about this that feels like an angry seizing of a power that was so potent once to a people that it had to be broken this badly. this like declaration that your goddess, your figurehead, she has no mother. We've broken her mothers, she's ours now. I think that actually indicates the amount of power she once held for Minoan people. And before them, different peoples of old Europe.